Hello, folks. Welcome back to Chris Wyatt Reports. This is Chris in Central Pennsylvania. My guest today is Kallie Kriel from AfriForum. We've spoken many times in the past, even met in South Africa and here in the States. But today we're going to talk about this odd situation. The African National Congress recently released on the 14th of June a press statement regarding the Bergview College in the Eastern Cape. This is a situation where the principal, if I've got this correct, I stayed away from this story for a long time because I wanted to play out because, he said, she said, we don't know said. It's been playing out, and that actually plays a role in what we're going to talk about here with some lawsuits going on, criminal injury and some other things. But I stayed away from this for a long time because I simply didn't know the facts. But now that we've got some reliable actors involved who are talking about this, I felt it was time to talk about this specifically since AfriForum's private prosecuting unit has laid some charges against some senior members of the ANC and the EFF. But this situation, if I recall it correctly, what happened was there was either the assault or molestation or rape of a small child, maybe 7 years old, if I'm not mistaken, at this school. And the principal was falsely accused of being involved or having done it. And now it plays out. We're finding out that, of course, this rush to judgment, senior politicians tarred and feathered this gentleman illegitimately. They've harmed his reputation. They've damaged his future prospects. And wherever you go now, it's kind of like Graham Smith. He'll forever be seen when people do research 30 years from now about racism in South Africa. Well, this racist cricket captain, except he wasn't. But the media ran endless stories about it. And the same sort of situation is happening here to the reputation of Mr. Peterson. Kallie, I didn't greet you. Hello. How are you doing?
Chris, I'm doing well, especially if I can speak to you again on this program.
Well, it's a pleasure. Let's talk about this. Did I get anything wrong there in this story? Because as I said, I've kind of kept it to the side and not put a big focus on it. But is that essentially the situation? A gentleman has been falsely accused of something?
Yes, that's totally correct. I think there's a further thing that there was actually no crime committed in the first place. And it's not as if the police did not know that. They did the investigation last year. They also investigated for the presence of any form of DNA. And they also had an interview with the little girl in which she indicated that she was not raped. And because of all those facts, you had the National Prosecuting Authority deciding not to prosecute. So initially it all went well. But then there was a drive by politically driven individuals to scapegoat Mr. Peterson. And that is totally unfortunate. And it snowballed to such an effect that he was openly announced as the rapist. And this actually shows what kind of evil people some of the people in the ANC are, and also to the left of them in the EFF. Because what you've seen is somebody like Fikile Mbalula publicly putting out Mr. Peterson's name, making it public, and then using words such as saying he's a child rapist. He even called him an animal. And the abuse, we know after our visit in the US, there are also elements in the ANC that would want to discredit AfriForum. But Fikile Mbalula also abused this situation because AfriForum then represented Mr. Peterson by saying, AfriForum, we are in a situation where we defend animals. And of course, we know the only reason why AfriForum assisted him is because our private prosecution unit looked at the facts, saw that there was no evidence whatsoever, saw that the persecution of Mr. Peterson was driven ideologically from the left, and that's why we represented him. And the facts showed he was innocent. But of course, the facts did not stand in the way of people in the ANC and also the EFF to go directly after Mr. Peterson, and then of course also in the process harming his family, his child and his wife in the process.
Well, I would imagine that he's probably received some threats from some folks based on this because people don't look very kindly on people who abuse children like this, even though he didn't do it. So is that in fact the case? Has there been any threats against him?
Yes, most definitely. Well, there's a lot of harm that was done. There were death threats to such an extent that he and his family had to flee from his home and could not safely stay in his home. So he had to move out. His wife has a guest house, She had to close that business immediately. And then, of course, that his child, of course, then has to listen to these things that his father is a child rapist. You can imagine being his wife having to deal with this. And then, of course, he had to leave the school. So it impacted on his family life. It impacted on his financial ability with his wife's business. It impacted on his career as a school principal. So lots of harm was done. And that is why the ANC's recent statement that you've mentioned angers me so much. They have deliberately destroyed the life of a family, and now they want to defend their behavior. And I think that is inexcusable.
But Kallie, aren't you and Afri Forum just being a little overly sensitive? I mean, gosh, I mean, the Minister of Police himself, Senzum Kuno, issued an apology. Doesn't that make it all better? Won't that restore his reputation, give him his job back, and destroy the false political narrative in the press? I mean, come on, aren't you being overly sensitive here?
No, well, of course, Mr. Mchunu, what was different in his case, that was the information that was given to him. But he did not go to use words like an animal, pedophile, child rapist. He wrongly accused him of being a suspect, which is a huge problem. The Minister of Police should state his facts. But unlike the others, he came to the fore and apologized and stated quite clearly that it was a mistake. But everything is not right now. At this stage, the school does not want Mr. Peterson back. At this stage, his family do not feel comfortable to go back. And you can imagine, even if you were proven to be innocent, as you've mentioned with Graham Smith, people can go onto Google, and especially if he wants to go on with his education career, even though being innocent, would a school want to appoint somebody that was part of something as controversial as this? The fact is, I think if we're speaking about oversensitive or insensitive, I think it's the ANC being insensitive because they are now playing the GBV, gender-based violence card, to try and justify what they've done. But the fact is, we are all serious about fighting gender-based violence. In fact, Advocate Gerrie Nel, that represented Peterson, he and his team, has driven investigations and prosecuted a number of people for violence against women, including Advocate George Bizos, the late George Bizos' son, Alexi Bizos, that broke 7 of his wife's ribs. He was found guilty after we prosecuted them. So if there's anybody fighting against this, it's us. The ANC are the last people to speak about the fight against gender-based violence, because what have they done? When they came to power, they used cadre deployment. They still use it. They made themselves guilty of corruption. We've seen maladministration. And what that has done is weaken the South African police. It has weakened the National Prosecuting Authority in a big way. And it also led to a situation where we have backlogs in our courts. And that is why many of the women that are victims and children that are victims don't see justice, because the criminal justice system is failing them. And who should take responsibility for that? It's the ANC and the various ANC-led governments that we've seen. So for them now to say, well, they're strongly against gender-based violence, it's actually ludicrous. The fact is, they made themselves guilty of slander, destroyed somebody's life, and now are not willing to recognize their mistakes, and they are playing holier than thou as if they are now the big campaigners. They are the problem, and that is why we decided we will go after them. For Fikile Mbalula, he can tell his legal team they must be ready, because our legal team is ready to go after him in a big way. We are ready to go after Julius Malma in a big way. He made himself guilty of also calling Mr. Peterson a rapist. Also the MEC, an ANC MEC, is a member of a executive council in the Eastern Cape, GADE, did the same. So we are also going after him. What we've seen here was criminal behavior, literally and figuratively. It's criminal to accuse somebody that's innocent, but also in terms of our law, crimen injuria is a criminal transgression. So criminal charges were laid against them. But they need to also pay literally. So apart from the criminal charges, we also said that our legal team will assist Mr. Peterson for defamation claims in a civil matter. And not only against these three, we've seen all these on Black Twitter or X today, where there's a strong ideological drive where Mr. Peterson was torn apart. And there are so many people there, you can't make a civil case against all of them. So we've taken the most prominent one, a former DA parliamentarian, Pumzile van Dam, who called Mr. Peterson a pedophile, said AfriForum defends pedophiles, made a claim that the child identified Mr. Peterson as the suspect or the guilty person, while the child, in fact, said the total opposite. So we're also taking her on for defamation. So their legal teams have to be ready. We want to make an example of people that abuse their political position to try to further their own careers, willing to destroy the lives of people. That is not something we can accept.
Well, Kallie, let me preface this by saying the following. The media, politicians often jump on issues like this for political gain. We know that. There are cases of this happening that happen to all South Africans, black, white, brown. It doesn't matter. But there seems to be a rather disturbing preponderance of this effort to destroy lives, to cancel people from society, from participation in the economy, and anything with leadership positions. So you have politicians, the media, and the South African Human Rights Commission, which I call the South African Captured Human Rights Commission, all conspiring or at least working independently here to destroy people with canceling them. So we've got people like Nobs Mkhize, who goes on a Fly South Air flight and verbally, racially insults colored flight attendants and then physically assaults people on the plane, including the flight attendants, throwing punches, attacking them. Not only is she not banned from civil aviation, she does lose her job working for the government's broadcaster, SABC, but not only is she not banned from flying, she also, we've seen no resolution to the South African Human Rights Commission case that came forward. Nothing substantive anyway. In addition to that, we have Nota Baloye going on podcasts saying that white women are genetically inferior and incapable of breeding, that white people are dogs and should be leashed and tied up, and that they're genetically inferior because they're Neanderthals, and also calling for the murder of whites and being driven to the seas. This is incredibly racially insensitive language. It's also a violation of South African law, which doesn't allow speech like that. I mean, it's inciting violence, among other things. And he's only forced to issue a weak, mealy-mouthed apology in which he didn't even write the apology, and he laughed about it and added one word to it. Meanwhile, just a small sampling of things, Sky situation on Twitter a couple of years ago where Amy's life was destroyed, nearly driven to suicide, lost custody of her child over false claims that she was a Twitter account. And the people found guilty in this case were given a token fine of, I think it was 15,000 or 50,000 rand, which is a joke, destroying this young lady's life. That happened. Then we have Hank's Old Irish Pub. The racism directed against them, completely cooked up false case. The South African Human Rights Commission demonically went on that story without the facts and destroyed the reputation of Hank's Old Irish Pub. Then, of course, we have the situation with the Northwest resort owner who was physically attacked by a mob of black guests because they weren't following the rules there, and they turned that into a case against him for race when he did nothing wrong. We have the video of it. And then on top of that, we have the situation where they politically assassinated Roman Kabanak, who was working for the Ministry of Agriculture because he didn't like what he had to say on X, but what he said on X wasn't a violation of any laws. And then, of course, to wrap this up with these cases that seem to be racially motivated, we have the Ronaldo Hus situation where 15 years ago he did a video and it was academic, and they used it to destroy his career as a politician. What I'm getting at, Kallie, is that I don't want to say that this is racially motivated, but these are some very specific cases. I haven't cherry picked. I've looked across the spectrum from private citizens to politicians to business people, all of whom have been targeted. And then we have people clearly doing things that are racially motivated to harm other people, like the Nobbs and Kesey, the Notaboloy case, and nothing is done to these people. They aren't bankrupted. They aren't hauled before the courts. Yet we have the ANC, every time that they get caught with their pants down, they go on the podium and start talking about how gender-based violence is a national priority, except it's not. I mean, we have two different issues here. The ANC paying lip service to gender-based violence and using it when it works for them politically. And then we have this issue, I believe, of racially motivated attacks to cancel South Africans. Do you see any of what I just said as being true, or is it just am I just cherry picking here?
No, I think if the viewers just listen to the number of facts that you mentioned here, nobody can argue against that. The fact is, when President Trump says there are very bad things happening in South Africa, I think one of the very bad things is the situation that we have total double standards. It depends on who the perpetrator or is seen to be. And that determines how the Human Rights Commission acts, how sometimes, unfortunately, even the courts act, how the society act, because you also have the left-stream media that totally aligns themselves with this kind of double standards, where there is disproportionate reporting when the Afrikaner or any other African with a light complexion is accused, while in other cases it's simply ignored or even defended. And I think apart from all those examples you've mentioned, I think the worst one of them all is the Julius Malema case, where Julius Malema openly says, on an ethnic basis, kill the Boer, which are Afrikaners, kill the farmers. He chants that. Then you have initially the ANC even defending that in court. And then we have, after even that chant was displayed in the White House, when President Ramaphosa came back, he was asked about it. And then he said, no, that is according to our laws. The court said it is fine. And he even defended it again. Our courts legalized it. So that is the biggest double standard that you can have. There was also once the Human Rights Commission found when Julius Malema said, I'm not going to calling for the slaughter of white people, at least not for now. He was also found not guilty by the Human Rights Commission because it was actually ludicrous. They said because he was black, he could make these statements because of history. So those are the kind of things, the double standards, and it's time we fight back and say we want to make sure that there is equality before the law. It doesn't matter what your race is. If you're a white person that does something wrong, you should be punished. If you're a black person that does something wrong, you should be punished. And the media should write on all these instances and condemn crime and not treat others differently. The same with the government and the state president. That is what we need to fight for, and that is why we are taking this case so seriously, because it provides us with an opportunity to make a stand against the injustice that we are seeing with regard to double standards in the country.
Well, in fact, I believe in this case, not only is it an opportunity to take a stand, but I mean, some really stupid politicians have been getting away with all kinds of nonsense for many, many years, have really exposed themselves. I mean, how do they combat their Twitter statements, their public press releases, their comments on camera? I mean, they clearly made these statements. You mentioned Pumzile van Dam. What I find interesting about her is that the former member of the DA and shadow minister in the parliament, who was in Parliament for 7 years. She considers herself to be a tech consultant and activist who specializes in combating political disinformation and misinformation. It would appear that she's guilty of the very thing that she says that she's an expert in. Maybe that's how she's an expert. She spreads it.
No, most definitely. She's definitely an expert, and she knows exactly how to spread this information. But also in her case, she said even that the child identified Peterson, Mr. Jaco Peterson, as the perpetrator. And now she's just standing back and said, no, no, I did nothing wrong. She sticks to a point. She's even telling AfriForum she's ready for us. And that is great that she's ready for us because we are definitely going after her.
Well, that's some interesting news to hear about that. Is she in South Africa or is she still over here at the anti-Semitic University of Harvard where she was out for a while? I don't know if she's back in South Africa or not. Is she there?
No, no, she is abroad. She sits in at Harvard, and she's throwing stones from from that side towards us. But in terms still of a civil claim, we can go ahead. It would have been harder for the criminal case because she's situated there. But in terms of the slander and the harm that was suffered by Mr. Peterson and his family, we can take her on in South Africa. So we will welcome her when she comes back and see her then in court because that is where she belongs. She needs to be held accountable.
Well, that's going to be interesting. But talk about dual standards, double standards here. South Africa is a bizarre country at times, Kallie. I don't mean to insult South Africa. I have a great affection for South Africans. But I mean, in Kanaland, Jeffrey Donson, a convicted child rapist, raping a girl when he was mayor of Kanaland, convicted of it, then came back and was the mayor again. No outrage about that. Yet we have senior members of the ANC and a misinformation expert running their mouth and slandering and libeling someone. And again, all I can come back to is why this case, other than the fact that he's a white man in a position of power and he must be destroyed. Am I missing something?
No, I think what is in terms of these cultural wars that we are seeing also in the US, and this whole idea of a cancel culture has unfortunately found its way to South Africa. And what their strategy is, and we've also seen that strategy with regard to AfriForum, they have an orchestrated campaign using the media and even some politicians coming down on people like a ton of bricks. And then their strategy is people must simply retreat and then stay quiet. And then they would be successful. But the thing is that cancel culture cannot work if people don't allow it to work. And that was especially also after our US visit. There was an effort to try and silence us, not only with the threats of high treason, but specifically with this orchestrated attempt to discredit AfriForum and Solidarity. But I think they made a mistake in the sense that they thought this cancel culture would work on us. We are actually determined to make sure it does not work. And Mr. Peterson's action against them is also a fight back against the cancel culture. They tried to cancel him. He did not take it lying down, and I have a lot of respect for him. That because many people would say, "Well, let this just go," but he and his family decided he'll take a stand, and those are the kind of people that would make the country a better place. To say we will not stand for these kind of double standards, these motives that are evil motives, and we will fight against them. So we're actually looking forward to what is lying ahead in terms of these cases, and people are going to be held accountable.
Well, that's good. People should be held accountable. Of course, we had famously here in the States just a few years ago, the Covington Catholic School kids who went from Kentucky to DC to visit the nation's capital, and a veteran of Vietnam era who claimed to be a Vietnam War veteran, which was a lie. He just served in the military during Vietnam. A Native American stood there in these, 16-year-old kids' faces, beating a drum. And then people posted these things and the media carried the story without having the facts, claiming that they were harassing him or racially insensitive. When in fact, the full video showed that the kids were respectful, polite. He came up in their face threatening them. And as a consequence, CNN and other news organizations reportedly paid tens of millions of dollars to these kids because of what happened to them, their lives being upset. And of course, we have the famous Duke lacrosse rape case that never occurred. The lives of all these students completely destroyed, and to this day, many of them, their lives have never gotten back on track. A couple have become, I understand, alcoholics because of what happened to them. Their names dragged through the mud. The lacrosse team suspended at Duke over a completely fictional story told by a prostitute. And some of the boys involved in this, the university students involved in this, weren't even on campus when this happened. Yet their lives were destroyed and they were falsely accused and hauled before. And this, of course, led to the prosecution and imprisonment of Nifong, the prosecutor who used this for political fame and wound up in prison for prosecutorial misconduct. But it doesn't make right what happened to them. Now, in the case of the Duke lacrosse kids, people don't remember their names. They've got millions of dollars and maybe they came out all right. The case of Amy and the Sky narrative in South Africa, that never came right, even though the judgment was against them. I really hope that if these people are guilty, which would appear to be the case looking at public statements, that a severe price is paid for this, because this is unacceptable, how this is used to destroy people's lives on both sides of the Atlantic, Kallie. And it's especially egregious in South Africa, where South Africans, based on skin color, are already under assault, already at a disadvantage in the legal system. And for someone to falsely accuse you of something, you're already on the back foot trying to protect yourself in the system. To me, it seems morally reprehensible.
No, indeed, it is so. But at least there is some good news. I think the vast majority of people in this country reject this kind of behavior. Even in terms of studies, we see that the majority of people in this country reject the chant, kill the Boer. But that makes it even worse that despite this fact, the left is allowed to use the media, to use leftist politicians or leftist politicians to use this to create the impression that this is how the majority of people feel. And that is also why we need to start holding the media accountable. We need to start holding the politicians accountable. We had now already 8 media institutions in South Africa that had to apologize to AfriForum for publishing lies. And those are not just, I don't believe they are mainstream anymore. Let's rather call them left stream. But it is major outlets such as News 24, such as Daily Maverick, such as Newsroom, such as Mail and Guardian, such as Sunday World. And some of them had to apologize to us more than once. But those are the kind of things we should do. The time should be over where the left has a free rein to simply attack who they want without any consequences.
Well, some of those media outlets you've just mentioned have slandered me in print and lied about me in their broadcast, misrepresenting, telling fairy tales, claiming I talked about something. For instance, one news outlet claimed I talked about land reform, refuting a professor at Stellenbosch University. Wasn't even talking about land reform. I was talking about what sanctions the U.S. had put on South Africa. There are none, because that professor lied on air, and so I exposed that. And then the next week, that news organization said I was talking about land. I wasn't, it's astounding what they get away with here. And if you're not wealthy and connected, you're really a victim. So I suspect a lot of people are probably grateful that your private prosecutions unit stepped up to help Jaco Peterson, because his life has been utterly turned upside down. I want to read a sentence from this ANC press release and just highlight a couple points here. So they say that AfriForum's decision to pursue this matter is disingenuous, ideologically driven, and flawed. That sounds an awful lot like to me, like the opposite here. That's actually their situation. It reflects a tendency to deflect attention from the pain of victims and a responsibility we all share in building a society free of fear and violence. We will not apologize for speaking out in defense of the voiceless. Well, I don't think the ANC should apologize for speaking out in defense of the voiceless. But that's not what's happening here. If I understand correctly, you said there was no assault, there was no rape, there was no molestation. The little girl herself said so. I believe you said that was the case. So who is the victim here? The victim here is the reputation and the life of Jaco Peterson and his family, and someone should pay for that. Is that a reasonable assumption on my part?
Yes, most definitely so. I think who the voiceless was in this situation is somebody like Mr. Peterson's wife, Mr. Peterson's son, whose voice was not heard here. They could actually not dare speak publicly because they had to flee. Those are the people who are the victims in this regard. And what actually has happened here, the ANC, they're the perpetrators. They're not fighting for victims. They've become the perpetrators in this case, but also in many others. And so that is why those arguments simply don't work. And I think people see that their efforts to try and justify something that is not justifiable will fail. And that is why we are going ahead with this case.
Now, has Bergview College terminated his employment? Is that correct?
Well, there is still a process ongoing, which I cannot speak on Mr. Peterson's behalf. But as we are speaking, he is not at school. He's not allowed to go back. We will see what the end of the process would be.
Well,
But
I
of
could.
course, our colleagues at Solidarity, the trade union, is also assisting him in that regard.
I assume he's a member of a union, then that must be why they're helping him out. So I mean, not to pick on Bergview College here, but at some point one has to question if the gentleman is innocent, if there are no charges here, why would they dismiss him? I can understand from a public relations standpoint, from an optics standpoint, why they would want to disassociate, even if he's innocent. But at some point, and I'm not suggesting any future prosecution here, I'm just saying at some point, should he not be allowed to return to that occupation or to that job at that location, I would think they bear some responsibility. But you don't have to comment on that. That's I'm just throwing that out there for the audience. So this will likely take some time, will it not? I mean, you've got a civil case against someone that's at the anti-Semitic institution. I mean, sorry, Harvard University, someone who's doing at the Anti-Semitism Center here in the United States. And then, well, and that's a fair comment. They've been accused of that, and they've been lost federal funding over their stance. But you've got someone here at Harvard who you've got a civil case against. You've got criminal injury cases, criminal cases in South Africa against significant, highly placed members of political parties. Yusuf Fikile Mabulula, Secretary General of the ANC, and Julius Malma, the erstwhile leader of the EFF, who, by the way, now is suffering the consequences of his calls for the extermination of white folks and his singing "Kill the Boer" and his support for for designated terror groups. He's now banned from going to the United Kingdom. I mean, maybe the chickens have come home to roost. I don't know if they're going to roost elsewhere, but with all of this stuff going on, is the tide turning perhaps, Kallie, or are these just one-offs?
No, I think that is why the international attention is very important because in many cases, as the case of Julius Malema you mentioned, we try to hold him accountable locally with our court system and also in terms of other prosecutions where there is a reluctance to prosecute him for corruption, despite the fact that there is a prima facie case with regard to On Point, but then also the VBS bank that was plundered. And those cases simply don't go on. So what do you do then? It is then important that we take the fight internationally, and then you get these kind of things happening, like the UK putting effectively a travel ban on him. One of these, in the next few weeks, we are going to make public what we call the Malema dossier, where we actually had our researchers to put it in a document. What has he done with regard to human rights abuses? What has he done with regard to his anti-Western, anti-US statements, pro-Hamas statements that was mentioned by the UK, but also in terms of corruption. And we will then go on a campaign internationally to try and make sure that we get other countries also to act. Countries, some of them, like the US, has mechanisms to punish people, like the Magnitsky Act, to hold people accountable for corruption, for human rights abuses, and supporting terror organizations. So those are the kind of actions that needs to be taken, and that is why we are thankful for the attention that we are getting from the US. And we're also thankful that we see now in the UK that this is taken seriously. We would actually want to make sure that more and more countries act in a similar manner.
Well, it's fascinating because, like Charlie Brown's character Pigpen, who's followed around by a dust cloud of dirty business behind him. I don't know if you're familiar with the Peanuts cartoon characters, but
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. So Pigpen is followed around by this dirt behind him. Julius Malema has got a whole history of odd things that don't seem to be prosecuted. Physically assaulting and attacking a lieutenant colonel in SAPS who was white during Winnie Mandela's funeral, firing live ammunition into the air at a rally, endangering public safety, and then purportedly conspiring to change the receiver so that they would deceive the forensics from the police. We've got the VBS scandal. We've got the Kill the Boer. We've got the Not Now, inciting violence at Senegal in 2020. And then magically, thousands of hectares of prime farmland in the Free State Northern Cape are torched by service delivery protest at 4 o'clock in the morning during lockdown. There's a whole list and litany of things that Julius Malema has been accused of and no convictions. He gets away with so many things if he's actually done these things. Many of them are indisputable. The assault on the police officer is indisputable. We saw the video. He physically attacked the police officer, no justification whatsoever, and suffered no consequences. So I could certainly understand people's desire for international attention on this, but it doesn't seem like the courts in South Africa are going to stand up for the right thing. And the reason I say this is that in 2003, Kallie, Kill the Boer was deemed illegal in South Africa. The courts said that it was illegal. Now it's okay. What changed? Now it's okay to kill white people? It wasn't okay in 2003? What did I miss?
Yeah, I think there's an unfortunate situation that is growing in the country now. We have a lot of competent judges, and we use the courts effectively in many cases. But what we have seen is how the Constitution structures the committee that appoints judges. And unfortunately, a lot of politicians are represented on that committee. Even Julius Malema is part of the committee that has to appoint judges. And that is what we've seen in Bloemfontein in the appeals court. You had one judge, Judge Railen Keitley, that previously made very negative remarks with regard to AfriForum, showed a bias. She said AfriForum has anachronistic ideas. And she even said that if in future, if she has to be on the bench in an AfriForum matter, we might deem it necessary to ask her to recuse herself. Actually, unfortunately, the legal team that worked on the case when she said those kind of things were not represented here. And only when they saw on television who the judge was, we got the info. We then went to ask the court for Judge Keitley to recuse herself. She refused to do so. Fellow colleagues on the bench also refused to have her step back in that regard. And then the reason should be asked why. Actually, ironically, at that stage, she was an acting judge at the appeals court, and she was in the process of applying to become a permanent judge. So you now had her and the bench having to take a decision on Julius Malema, while Julius Malema serves on the Judicial Service Commission. So, and not surprisingly at all, she was then appointed on the appeals court bench. So those are the kind of things, those are the kind of very bad things that are happening in South Africa.
Well, it does call into question the independence of the judiciary. We've seen this repeatedly. First, I've talked about this when it happened. The North Gauteng High Court declared that the Tourism Relief Fund during COVID was legal, even though it was racially discriminatory, and it violated the tenets of South Africa's constitution by giving tourism relief funds only to Black business people. I mean, that was simply wrong. That, of course, was overturned, but only months later after the money was all gone and nobody's getting any money from it. So then you also have, you mentioned Judicial Service Commission. You'd have to wonder about the independence of judges. And when the only person I can think of that's faced more criminal trials than Donald Trump is Julius Malema, he's actually on the Judicial Service Commission. And not just that, the Mkhonto Party had the audacity to appoint disgraced and impeached, removed from the bench, John Schlope to be a member of this body as well. Now he's been removed by another court, and they're crying about this. But sometimes the courts get it right in South Africa, but far too often they come to conclusions, decisions that clearly violate South Africa's constitution. And I need to remind our audience that this is a constitution promulgated, drafted, implemented, voted on and instituted by a majority black government in the 1990s. That's who brought this constitution to bear, not the National Party, not white supremacists, not white racists, not any other racists, but well, maybe there's some racists antsy, I don't know, but it was brought by a majority black government. And these courts are inconsistent on their findings in what's constitutional, what's unconstitutional. I should think that should be a concern for South Africans because, as you said, Kallie, most South Africans, and I know black, white, brown, Indian colored, Xhosa, Venda, Tswana, Afrikaners, English, all kinds of South Africans, and most South Africans I meet, 99.9% of these people are good, honest people who don't care about any of this nonsense. They don't believe in this. But there is a segment of society who make money, who make a living, who get what they're really looking for: craving political power, self-aggrandizement, self-enrichment by pushing these racial narratives and misusing the courts. The courts, I don't want to say the courts are captured, but clearly their judgments are inconsistent.
Yes, they are good judges, and we win many cases, but when it's with regard to technical issues, as soon as a case becomes political in nature, it becomes harder. But what you don't want, I don't want to write off the whole judiciary because of the behavior of a few, Judge Keitley and a number of others. But what you don't want is the court case to become a lottery. It just depends what judge is going to sit on the bench. So those are the challenges we have. But again, we try to use our remedies locally. We will continue to do so. Because it also, if you want international support, the first thing that is a principle that is said is you have to have had exhausted all your local remedies. So we really went through all the processes, and our remedies are exhausted now with regard to kill the boer. In many other cases, we're going through the same process. But as soon as we're not successful locally, we don't have any other choice than to go internationally. And I also think the international community has an obligation to also oversee this process, because the international community oversaw the 1990s, the negotiations, in terms of the broad spirit. And you know what, internationally it was seen as the miracle with the Mandela figure. And the spirit of it was that Afrikaners would give up political power, but they would be able to survive as a cultural community, with all these protections being built in. Now you have an agreement that was brokered with the support of the international community being broken by the ANC, not sticking to it, by not only just bearing with Afrikaners, but attacking the Afrikaans community directly with the Bella Act that we've spoken about before, which targets the existence of Afrikaans schools. It does targets Afrikaans cultural communities. That is the breaking of the agreement of 1994. And those that helped to broker this agreement has a legitimate right to say, listen, you are not sticking to an agreement we were part and parcel of.
Well, I think that's a fair statement. The concept behind what brought the end of the apartheid era and the CODESA summit, the Convention for Democratic South Africa, has been betrayed in so many ways. So many ways. Well, Kallie, I want to thank you for your time as always. It's a pleasure. Let me give you a moment to if you've got any final comments or thoughts either about this case or maybe some hope for South Africans, because we often report on so many bad things in South Africa, but not everything is going badly in South Africa. I mean, you can still get some good, you can get some good Dwarvorce and biltong there, but any final thoughts on this or anything you'd like to add before we wrap up?
No, I have a lot of hope for the future, not because of President Ramaphosa's government, but despite his government, because we know we've made the mind shift quite a long time ago, is to say our future does not lie in the hands of leftist politicians. We should not allow them to decide what the future of our children would be. Of course, it has a huge impact on us, but we still have hands, we still have a brain. We have now more unity than before amongst the Afrikaner community. And that creates the circumstances where we can continue to build the cultural infrastructure we need to survive as a cultural community, also in terms of safety. So when the government fails with policing, we set up our own neighborhood and farm watches, and we are looking after our own safety. When the government destroyed Afrikaans universities in the solidarity movement, we built our own university, our own artisan training. I think you have visited some of those before. So it angers one when you have this kind of behavior, evil behavior by politicians. But we should never give up hope. We will survive. We are pioneer people, just as the American culture was also built on a pioneer people, people that are strong, getting onto a wagon, tracking in a certain direction. And if you're a pioneer people, challenges are not new to you. And our previous generations overcame a lot of challenges and real threats, and we will do so again. So I'm very hopeful, despite what we are seeing happening in the country.
Well, that's an excellent message of hope for South Africa and for South Africans, not just for Afrikaners, but for all South Africans. The idea that you can overcome and adapt, self-bestuur, I think was the phrase in Afrikaans. So, Kallie, I want to say bye-bye, donkey. Thank you for your time, and we'll keep up on this story, and we hope that it all comes right for Mr. Peterson, because what has happened to him appears to be an egregious breaking of faith with people who are innocent until proven guilty, and we see the consequences of lives destroyed. Folks, my guest, Kallie Kriel from AfriForum tonight. Kallie, bye-bye, donkey.
Yeah, bye, donkey Chris. And you've just been here, but of course, you're always welcome to return. And I hope it's in the near future and not only in a few years' time.
Well, I hope it's not in a few years' time. We've got a lot of things that we've got to keep addressed in South Africa sooner than that. But once again, thanks, Kallie, and we'll chat with you again on this topic.
Thank you so much.